They say that one frozen morning, a native girl dragged the body of a white boy out of the woods, and that single moment stopped a war from swallowing two nations whole. Sounds like frontier legend, doesn't it? But I saw the trail of blood myself, stretching farther than a man could throw a stone, and heard the black owl cry 3 times before going silent, the old sign of a soul too lost to pass on. That morning, Ayana, the last daughter of the Red Ridge tribe, wasn't looking to save anyone. She was tracking deer. But fate doesn't ask permission before it moves. Less than an hour later, she found the boy curled beneath a pine leg, twisted wrong shirt torn at the neck like someone had tried to strangle him. And his eyes, those wide, desperate eyes, locked on her like she was the last hope in a world gone cold. In this land, Red Ridge people don't rescue white children, especially not ones that smell of Cedar Hollow, that cursed town, where even the name makes arrows rise from quivers. But Ayana didn't walk away. She knelt. Her hand touched the boy's icy skin, and from that moment on, the destiny of the West changed not by bullet or blade, but by a girl no one expected to care. The snow had fallen thick the night before, blanketing the valley in silence so deep it muffled even the wind. Ayana moved slowly through the tree line, her breath puffing white in the early morning cold, bow in hand, footsteps light as a deer's. She hadn't meant to wander far from camp, just far enough to clear her mind from the whispering talk of elders and the burdens they placed on her shoulders. But it wasn't the sound of prey that made her stop. It was the smear of crimson across fresh snow, a color too dark, too wet to be anything but blood. She knelt, pressing her fingers gently into the red-soaked patch, feeling how it was still warm beneath the frost. Whoever bled here hadn't gone far. Tracks led away, dragging uneven like someone had limped for their life and barely kept upright. Ayana stood, her heartbeat slow but steady, and followed. The forest was quiet, but not the peaceful kind. It was the kind of quiet that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand, the kind that told old hunters something was still watching, still waiting. It wasn't long before she found him, curled near the base of a pine, half buried in needles. And snow lay a boy no more than 13 by the look of him. His clothes were torn filthy and soaked through with blood from a gash on his leg. One arm was wrapped around himself like he was trying to hold in the pain, while the other clutched something at his chest, a silver medallion, dull and worn, but still gleaming faintly against the morning light. His lips were blue, his eyes wild and vacant. He didn't speak, didn't move, just stared at her unblinking, as if unsure if she was real or just another ghost in the snow. Ayana had seen many things in her 16 winters, but never had she felt her heart twist the way it did then. Every part of her training said to leave him to avoid the wrath that would come from her people if they found out she'd helped a white boy. But there was something about the way he looked at her, like she was the first human face he'd seen in days, maybe longer. And more than that, something about the blood trail, the medallion, and the bruises told her this boy wasn't lost by accident. Someone had meant for him to die out here. She lowered her bow, stepped carefully toward him, and said nothing. The boy flinched, but didn't retreat. He was too weak, too far gone. Ayana crouched down, brushed a clump of snow from his hair, and wrapped her arms under his shoulders. He was lighter than she expected, but every movement drew a soft whimper from his throat. She didn't look back. With slow, steady steps, she began to drag him toward the old hunting cabin her grandfather had built long ago, the one no one used anymore, deep in the timberline. That was the only place she knew he could rest without being found. The boy never said a word. But as she glanced down and saw his fingers still wrapped around that tarnished silver charm, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, someone out there was looking for him. Or worse, that someone had already decided he wasn't meant to be found. And that's where the mystery truly began, not with a name, but with silent snow and a girl who chose to help when everyone else would have walked away. The cabin creaked like an old man clearing his throat, its bones weary from years of wind and weather. Ayana laid the boy down on a straw mat that hadn't seen use since her grandfather hunted elk in these woods. The fire took time to catch pine needles, a strip of deer fat, and patience, but when it did, warmth spread like mercy across the boy's pale face. He stirred, groaned once, and curled tighter into himself like a wounded cub. Ayana watched him quietly, wondering what kind of child had to learn so young how to survive by silence. For hours he drifted in and out, fevered and shaking lips, muttering broken pieces of words she didn't recognize. English, yes, but cracked and slurred like a song half remembered. He never said his name, not once. And when she asked gently, he only turned his face away like it was something he'd already buried. The silver medallion stayed tight in his grip, the chain biting into his skin, even as his fingers turned blue from holding it. Whatever it meant, it was all he had left of a world that no longer wanted him. Ayana cleaned the wound on his leg as best she could, grinding pine sap and yarrow into a paste, just as her mother once taught her. It wasn't just the leg that worried her. It was the bruises on his ribs, the rope marks around his wrists, and the silent scream hiding in his eyes. This boy hadn't wandered off. He'd been taken hurt, left for dead, and someone somewhere was counting on him not getting back up again. She sat by the fire through the night bough within reach, listening for sounds beyond the wind. A branch snapped once out in the trees. Then nothing. Just the long stretch of darkness pressing against the walls. She didn't know what storm this boy was bringing to her doorstep, but something deep in her bones told her it wouldn't stay hidden for long. There are some fires, she thought, that don't need kindling. They arrive burning. And in the stillness of that cabin, as dawn crept over the treetops like an old ghost, Ayana knew two things for certain. First, this boy was no ordinary child. And second, if she didn't protect him, no one else would. Now, if you've made it this far, you already feel it too, that quiet tension pulling beneath the surface. Stick around, friend, because what Ayana is about to uncover next will change everything you thought you knew about justice, about loyalty, and about how far one girl will go to keep a promise no one asked her to make. By the third morning, the boy had strength enough to sit up barely. He leaned against the cabin wall, arms wrapped around his ribs, watching the fire like it held answers. Ayana didn't push him, not yet. Trust was like thawing river ice. It cracked slowly and if force broke wide open. But something shifted that day. His voice, weak and hoarse, rasped through her 3 words that made her blood turn cold. Cedar Hollow burned. The name hit her like a stray arrow. Cedar Hollow, dusty, crooked, and mean, was a settlement known more for its gallows than its mercy. It sat 2 days' ride west of the ridge, where law came late and hatred came early. For Ayana's people, it was a place to avoid at all costs. But for this boy, it had been home until someone set fire to it. He spoke in fragments, house-burning screams in the dark smoke. Too thick to breathe. His parents gone. The townsfolk blamed him, called him a curse, said the fire started in his hands. Ayana listened without a word, jaw clenched tight as old rope. No child lights their own home aflame, not unless something darker is at work. The boy trembled when he mentioned a man named Crowe. He told them, "It was me," he whispered, eyes wide with pain that went deeper than injury. "Said I brought it. Said my daddy had it coming." Then he looked away, silent again, retreating into the cave of his own memory. Ayana had heard enough. This wasn't just some lost child. He was carrying the weight of a town's fear and one man's vengeance. Outside, the wind picked up, stirring the pines into whispers. Somewhere beyond the trees, something was moving. The boy didn't notice, but Ayana did. She stood slowly, strapping on her bow, every muscle alert. "We need to move," she said quietly. "If Crowe's the kind of man I think he is, he won't let you stay missing for long, not if you remember what he did." The past had caught up with them, and it wasn't coming alone. Somewhere in the ashes of Cedar Hollow was a secret worth killing for, and the only person alive who could speak it was a boy with no name. And as we ride forward into the next chapter, you'll see just how far men will go to bury truth beneath smoke and ruin, and how one girl armed with nothing but courage stands ready to dig it back up. The storm rolled in by midday quiet. At first, just a haze of clouds stretching low across the valley, like some great gray beast settling in to watch. Inside the cabin, Ayana sat beside the boy, damp cloth in hand, brushing away the layers of dirt that still clung to his neck and shoulders. He didn't protest. His body was too tired, too grateful for warmth and safety to resist her touch. But when she pulled back the edge of his shirt to clean a bruise along his collarbone, something else caught her eye. Etched into his skin, half covered in grime, was a small faded tattoo. It wasn't a child's mark. This was something military, sharply inked, designed with purpose. A circle of stars around crossed rifles, the kind she'd seen once on the arms of frontier rangers posted near the northern forts. Ayana's hand froze in midair. What was a boy no older than 13 doing with the mark of a soldier? She wiped away more dirt, revealing that the lines were scarred over, as if someone had tried to burn or cut it off. That made her breath catch. Whoever had done this didn't just want to hide it. They wanted to erase it entirely. She didn't ask questions right away, not then. But when the fire burned low and the boy stirred again, she simply pointed and asked, "That mark, where did it come from?" His eyes flicked down, saw it exposed, and for a heartbeat, she thought he might bolt like a trapped animal. But he didn't. He stared into the flames and said, "My father was a scout. Rode with the Rangers. They put the mark on me when I turned 10, said I needed to carry it if anything happened." Then he added, barely above a whisper, "Now I carry it alone." The pieces were starting to fall into place, but not the kind that offered peace. Cedar Hollow hadn't just burned because of fear or accident. There was something buried beneath that fire, something tied to land power, maybe even stolen military secrets. And this boy, this wounded child, with a soldier's mark and a hunted soul, was the last link still breathing. Ayana felt the chills settle deep into her bones, colder than any mountain wind. She understood now this wasn't just about saving a life. It was about unearthing a truth someone powerful wanted dead and gone. And out there in the distance, men were already moving riders with torches and iron on their hips, ready to silence the past before it could speak. But Ayana wasn't planning to stay quiet. Not now. Not ever. By the 5th night, Ayana stopped sleeping altogether. The boy had begun to speak in his dreams, shouting names, half-sentences, warnings in broken English. But it wasn't the nightmares that kept her awake. It was the feeling that eyes were on them out there in the dark beyond the tree line. The kind of silence that feels watched, like something just out of sight is waiting for the fire to die down. Word travels fast in the territories, faster than wind, faster than reason. Someone had spotted the two of them crossing the ridge days earlier. Maybe a trapper. Maybe worse. What mattered now was that both the white men and the native scouts were asking the same question. Have you seen them? But their reasons couldn't be more different. Cedar Hollow wanted the boy dead or forgotten. And among Ayana's people, there were whispers that she had broken tribal code by harboring a stranger, especially one that marked by war. The elders summoned her father, Chief Takakota, and though he said little, his silence told her everything. There are rules, old ones, rules carved from blood and loss, not easily bent. A white boy in their woods meant trouble, meant attention, meant war, if the wrong man came looking. And yet, Ayana had made her choice. Not out of rebellion, not even out of pity, but because something in that boy's brokenness mirrored a wound inside her she hadn't known was still open. But the world didn't care for good intentions. One morning, while gathering water from the creek, Ayana spotted hoofprints in the soft earth. Fresh, heavy, not tribal. They were being tracked, and not just by one side. White bounty men were riding the lower trails, asking hard questions with harder hands. And from the north, a band of young warriors, impatient and proud, had begun scouting the edge of her father's land, whispering that Ayana's loyalty had shifted. She had become a bridge no one wanted to cross. To the settlers, she was a threat. To her people, a traitor. And yet, she stood her ground, because some things once seen cannot be unseen. A child alone in the snow, a mark buried beneath bruises, a truth tied to fire and silence. They were hunted now. But before the story ends, you'll see sometimes it's the ones being hunted who know the paths no hunter dares follow. The storm came with no warning, no wind, no thunder, just clouds black as coal pouring in from the north like a silent army. The air turned heavy, thick with the scent of rain, and something older, something ancient. Ayana moved quickly, boarding the cabin windows with planks her grandfather once cut by hand, whispering the old words as she did. Not prayers exactly, more like promises. Promises meant to keep spirits out. Or perhaps to let the right ones in. The boy lay sleeping, brow damp with fever, mumbling again in his restless state. Outside, lightning tore across the sky in jagged silence. Striking so close, the trees glowed white for a breath. The rain followed hard and fast, battering the roof like fists of angry ghosts. Ayana sat at the edge of the fire, eyes closed, letting the rhythm of the storm carry her thoughts somewhere beyond flesh and wood. Somewhere older than names. That's when the vision came. She didn't fall asleep. Her eyes remained open, yet the room around her faded, swallowed by the crackling fire and the hiss of rain. In its place rose a great plain, stretching beneath a blood-red moon. A lone wolf stood in the center, head lifted, howling not with rage, but sorrow. Around it, shadows moved, some with spears, others with rifles. One by one, they turned their backs on the wolf, leaving it to stand alone. Until a child stepped forward. A boy marked by flame and frost reached out and touched the wolf's head. And in that moment, the howling ceased. Ayana gasped, her body snapping back to the cabin as if pulled by invisible hands. The fire had died down to embers, the boy still unconscious. But the meaning of the vision rang clear in her chest like a drumbeat from the old world. This child, this hunted, broken child, was not a burden. He was a warning, a fulcrum, a soul that could turn war to peace or peace to ashes. She looked down at him, sleeping like the storm had taken every ounce of weight from his small frame, and whispered, "You were never meant to be left behind." Something in her voice cracked with certainty. And just beyond the cabin, in the edge of the dark woods, unseen by both of them, eyes watched. Not with hatred, not yet, but with intent. Because a vision like that doesn't come without cost, and someone out there was ready to collect. The wind changed just after nightfall, sharp and sudden, carrying with it the scent of horses' sweat and gun oil. Ayana stepped outside the cabin, her ears tuned to every sound between the trees. The rain had stopped, but the world hadn't gone quiet. Not the kind of quiet she trusted. Somewhere out there, hooves pressed softly into mud, voices whispered low in whiskey-drowned breath, and the creak of leather saddles echoed like distant thunder. She knelt beside a tree, brushing her fingers through the dirt, and found it hoofprints. Not tribal. Steel-shod, heavy. 5, maybe 6 riders, no more than a mile out, circling like wolves that had caught the scent. The storm hadn't scattered them, it had covered their approach. Smart, ruthless. Whoever they were, they'd been trained to move at night, and they were coming straight for the firelight flickering through her cabin window. Inside, the boy slept, if you could call it that. His breaths were shallow, his skin pale, and the fever still hadn't broken. Ayana glanced at him, then at her bow, and then at the door. She wasn't afraid to die. But she would not let him be taken, not by men who came under cover of darkness, armed not with questions, but answers they wanted buried. She pulled the fire low, wrapped the boy in every blanket she had, and positioned herself near the window, with an arrow already strung. One way or another, the night would end in truth. The riders didn't announce themselves. They didn't need to. She saw their shapes in the trees, lanterns dimmed rifles across saddles, faces half covered in dust masks. And leading them was a man tall and broad. His long coat dragging through the brush, the brim of his hat pulled low. Samuel Crowe, the devil out of Cedar Hollow himself. Come not to talk, but to erase what he couldn't control. Ayana's grip tightened on her bow heart, steady as stone. She had no army, no backup, no right to even be in this fight. But she had something they didn't, truth, and a reason to stand her ground. By the time the first rider dismounted, the forest had gone deathly still. No owls, no breeze, just the sound of footsteps moving toward the door, slow and deliberate. And as Ayana drew her arrow back, her breath held between fate and fear. One thought passed through her like thunder. If they wanted to silence history, they'd have to kill it first. Ayana didn't flinch as the first boot hit the step outside the cabin. Her bow was drawn elbow-steady arrow aimed at the heart of the dark. She could see him now. Samuel Crowe emerging from shadow like a storm, given flesh flanked by two riders with rifles low at their hips. He didn't speak. Men like him didn't need words when they had numbers, firepower, and a town's fear behind them. But what he didn't have was time. Because while he stepped closer, Ayana stepped out. She moved from the doorway like smoke, slow and deliberate, the tip of her arrow never wavering. The men stopped in their tracks, not because of her size, small, thin, barely more than a girl, but because of her eyes. There was something in them the West had long forgotten: conviction without noise, courage without ceremony. "You ride any farther," she said, voice calm as river water, "and none of you ride back." For a moment the wind held its breath. Even the trees leaned in to listen. Crowe laughed low and bitter. "You think a single arrow can stop a noose girl?" But Ayana didn't answer him. She shifted her aim ever so slightly away from his chest and toward the lantern hanging from his saddle. One release, one shot. Flame met oil, and the lantern exploded in a roar of fire that startled the horses and sent one man falling into the mud. It wasn't about killing. It was about warning. And in that flash of flame, the message was clear: I'm not afraid of you. Before the men could recover, another sound cracked through the trees, sharp and shrill. A war whistle, then another, then a dozen more. From the hills, from the trees, from shadows they hadn't seen, Red Ridge warriors, silent and swift, emerging, like ghosts from the timberline. Bows drawn, eyes fierce. Chief Takakota stood among them, unblinking, his gaze locked on Crowe like judgment carved in stone. Ayana didn't lower her bow until her father passed beside her, hand on her shoulder, firm and proud. "You held the line," he whispered. She didn't reply. Her heart still thundered in her chest, not from fear but from the knowledge that she had stood between war and mercy, and chosen mercy with a string of sinew and an arrow carved in quiet resolve. But this wasn't over yet. Because before truth can set anything free, it must survive what hunts it. For a long moment, no one moved. The clearing was still warriors, with arrows notched, bounty men, with hands frozen at their hips, and Samuel Crowe standing between fire and fury with the smugness of a man who thought he'd never bleed. But Chief Takakota didn't draw steel. He raised a hand instead, a quiet gesture. And from behind him, an older warrior stepped forward, dragging someone by the collar, mud-covered, trembling eyes, darting like a rabbit caught in a snare. It wasn't another hired gun. It was one of Crowe's own men. The boy recognized him immediately, his body tensed, his breath caught. "He was there," he whispered. "The night of the fire." Ayana's gaze flicked toward the man, then back to Crowe, who had gone suddenly still. The older warrior gave the man a hard shove to his knees. He sputtered, cursed, and looked up, then spoke the words that shattered the quiet. It weren't the boy. It was Crowe. He set the fire. Said the father knew too much about the land deals, said he'd make it look like an accident. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was thick with consequence. Ayana could feel it pressing down on everyone, the weight of a truth long buried, now floating up like smoke from dying embers. Crowe didn't deny it. He didn't have to. The twitch in his jaw, the way his hand hovered near his pistol, told the story clearer than any confession. But this wasn't his land anymore. Not tonight. Not with every eye watching, not with the boy alive and the fire still fresh in memory. Chief Takakota stepped forward, his voice like gravel on stone. "You tried to burn truth to the ground," he said, "but truth rides the wind, and wind don't burn." He looked to Ayana, then to the boy, then turned his back on Crowe. That gesture, more than any blade, was the sentence passed. The Red Ridge warriors turned as one, slipping back into the trees like smoke. Crowe stood alone now. No men, no fire, no lies left to hide behind. And the boy, for the first time, stood too on his own 2 feet, the mark of the soldier still faint on his skin, but the weight of a future no longer chained to silence. "What comes next?" he asked, Ayana, voice soft. She looked toward the horizon, where the last light of day met the dark. "We go where truth can breathe," she answered, "because some stories aren't just told, they're survived." The next morning broke soft and gold like the land itself had exhaled. The storm was gone. The riders were gone. Only ashes remained in the clearing, but not the kind that burned with hate. These were the quiet kind, the kind that settle when a truth has finally been spoken. Ayana stood at the cabin's doorway, hair-braided, tight face calm. Beside her, the boy stared out at the hills, the medallion still hanging against his chest, no longer gripped in fear, but resting, as if it finally belonged to someone who had survived its weight. They didn't say much that day. Some things don't need words. The warriors had returned to their land, and the men from Cedar Hollow, what was left of them, rode back with silence trailing behind like dust. But in Ayana's heart, something had shifted. She was no longer just a girl who had broken the rules. She was now a line in the sand between justice and revenge, between fear and mercy. And somewhere deep in the hills, the ancestors whispered her name, with pride, Ngola, daughter of the wind. Chief Takakota watched from a distance, arms crossed, eyes glinting with that same quiet strength that had once carried a tribe through fire and famine. When he approached her later, he said only, "This, you gave back what the world tried to steal. Not just his life, but the way we choose to live with honor." Ayana didn't reply. She didn't need to. That kind of understanding lives in the space between fathers and daughters, between people and their land, between silence and story. As for the boy, he never remembered everything. Some scars even memory refuses to carry. But he knew enough that someone had believed in him when no one else would. That a girl who had every reason to leave him behind chose instead to stand beside him, bow in hand, truth in heart. In time, he took a new name, one given by the Red Ridge people. But he never forgot the old one, the one whispered by firelight when Ayana first found him in the snow. And somewhere even now, they say, the wind still carries that story across the valley of a girl with a bow, a boy with a secret, and a night where justice rode on horseback, but was met by someone braver than any lawman. But I wonder, if it had been you alone in the forest, hunted by both sides, would you have drawn your bow? Or turned away? Let us know in the comments below. And if stories like this speak to something deep in you, something old and good, don't forget to subscribe. There are more tales yet to tell, some waiting just beyond the next ridge.